All right, we are live. Today is Sunday, July 23rd, I think it is, 2017. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. This is Tracie Harris.
Hey.
Welcome to the Atheist Experience, live from Austin. We even put a graphic of Austin up behind us so you can see what our wonderful city looks like. And if we were to take this at sundown, you would see a stream of bats heading out of there. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I caught a little bit of a cold, but I'm going to struggle through. I was lucky yesterday. I was one of the performers in the evening Magic at the Capitol show, and that went pretty well despite my cold. We have a couple of announcements. Obviously, in September, the Bat Cruise is coming up, and you can go to atheist-community.org to find out more information about the ACA and the Bat Cruise. The Atheist Community of Austin is a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheist culture and the separation of religion and government. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that the show was operating at a $14,000 deficit for the year, and we asked some folks to donate. And they did. And so far, we have raised just a little over $12,000 towards that $14,000 goal. There's the little count.
It's amazing.
It's that way. It's that way. There we go.
That way.
There's a thermometer right there. We're a nonprofit, and your contributions help us continue to promote positive atheist culture and the separation of government and religion. This year, we'll be making some upgrades to the show websites and making further studio improvements. To donate, please left-click on the information button in the corner of the screen, and I don't know which corner, but I'll point to both four corners. Find a corner. There'll be a link there as well. And by the way,
it's like an airline.
I know.
There.
I feel like Vanna White. Can I get a button, a left-click button? Oh, there.
Exit.
The cool thing is, we wanted to say thank you to all the people who have donated and contributed. We do this show as pretty much volunteers, a labor of love, and have for, oh my gosh, it's been 13 years or so for me. And have you been on like 10 or 11?
I don't know if it's, I don't know.
Long time.
I don't know.
This is just what we do. It is a live call-in show where we interact with believers and non-believers and talk about what they believe and why, figure out where we agree and where we disagree. Sometimes it's a healthy debate, a little argument and disagreement. Sometimes it might get a little heated, although we should probably try to avoid that whenever possible. And sometimes it's just supportive and informational. I don't have any other announcements.
And I don't have a topic.
Yeah, and you don't have a topic. Okay, show's over. No, we're going to take our calls.
They're happy. They're so glad it's over.
I don't think that actually makes me happy that, people were, okay, yeah, get the hell off stage. We're done with you. We'll go ahead and start taking calls now from James in Virginia Beach. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I got a little cold, but I'm pretty good.
Well, I hope you feel better with that. First, I want to say big fan of the show. Called last week. Great discussion. Yeah. Did they give y'all? Did they give y'all what I was calling in for?
It says here something about value in the Bible, regardless of belief.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
When I wanted to clarify that when I say value in the Bible, I'm talking from like literary value, philosophical value, that kind of thing.
By the way, there's some kind of effect, I think, which may even be on our board that's
Sounds like he's in a can.
Yeah, I'm in a cave or a theater. Okay.
But I can hear you.
So go ahead, James.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
got better.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. My phone's a piece of crap. Yeah. So when I talk about the value in the Bible, regardless of whether you believe it, I think there's value within the Bible from the literary standpoint, from the larger philosophical stance. Whether you believe it or not, it's obviously got a major impact in society and so forth. I would argue it has values similar to value of all mythological works, literary works, and that sort of thing.
Sure. What difference does that make?
Well, I mean, I would argue that the Bible is important for that, and
I agree that I have no problem with the idea that the Bible has had literary and social impact because people have read it and shared it and believed things in it and found things that were significant for their life. So what? I mean, that's true of a lot of books.
Were you just calling to make that point?
Well, I mean, well, first of all, I want to say that this is a subject I've been trying to study more extensively in recent weeks. I just think that even for atheists, that there's a lot worth looking into the Bible for. And the same thing for like the Quran and all these other
For
books,
what?
a lot more.
For what reason?
Surely for the philosophical questions it raises.
Why would I need to read the Bible to learn anything about philosophical issues? Why couldn't I just, study philosophy?
Well, I mean, for an example, I would assume that you have mostly Christians on the theist side calling in the show, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in order for the betterment of the discussion, for the betterment of commonality and so forth, it helps to have the Bible as a frame of reference for those discussions.
Sure, but that's okay. This is the thing. As somebody who is a fundamentalist Christian and was going to be a pastor, I've read it, I've studied it, I've taught it. I know it. Hell, I know it probably better than a good many of the callers who come in here. That benefits the discussion. But what I'm asking is, let's say that there was the Big Book of Poop. Reading that Big Book of Poop would be useful if I was debating people who believed that the Big Book of Poop was real and gave them good information. But the issue is, does the Big Book of Poop actually provide any useful information apart from those discussions?
Well, to give an example, I suppose, take the Noah's Ark story. We'll just use that for an example. Regardless of whether we accept that to be factually true or not, and for the sake of the argument, let's say that it's not true.
I'll buy that.
I actually believe that too. I don't believe it's factually true, but
sure. What benefit do we get out of the Noah's Ark story?
Well, I would argue that it serves as an excellent reference point story to illustrate some important issues such as protection of the earth, protection of wide species, possibly a good allegory to use for the issue of global warming, which is a huge issue that needs to be taken care of. I would argue that using that story in that context is broadly beneficial.
Okay, so a fictional story about a god destroying and killing everything except for a family and a boat full of animals. Don't you think we could? I mean, you got to kind of twist it to make this about preserving the earth and animals and talking about global warming.
I guess it would.
Why can't we just teach those things without the Noah story?
Well, I mean, you probably could, but
couldn't you actually do it better without the Noah story? Why wouldn't it be better to give actual information rather than using a fictional account that really doesn't have anything to do with preserving the earth if the goal of God was to destroy pretty much everything on the earth?
Well, unfortunately, not every single person's going to buy the factual argument. So for some people, you have to reach them with the best possible thing that would reach them.
Okay. Well, the problem is that you're pointing to a book that says that the earth is yours to subdue and make your own. You're pointing to a book that has Jesus coming back, and this is why a lot of fundamentalists don't accept climate change, don't accept the very idea that we could do damage to the planet and actually destroy it, because God already has a plan and he's going to come back for us before that could happen.
That's what they taught in my church, and they were very literalist.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be better to just, I mean, if there are people for whom facts are not going to be persuasive, I don't think it's a good idea to start lying to them by twisting stories.
Well, I wasn't trying to suggest lying to them.
Well, you don't believe the Noah story's true, right?
Right.
So you're going to tell them a story that you don't believe is true, which isn't about climate change and it isn't about preserving the earth, and you're going to try to convince them that it is. I would say that's lying.
Well, I wasn't trying to say that. I wasn't trying to convince them that it is true. I was trying to suggest just using it to illustrate a point.
Well, for me, what you're doing, it doesn't illustrate that point. It's like me using the story of Jeffrey Dahmer killing a bunch of people as a way of encouraging people to love their neighbor and be peaceful. I mean, it's almost the exact opposite. God's trying to destroy everything, right? Except for one family and a bunch. Yeah. So I don't see any value in teaching the Noah account at all.
All right. Well, okay. You make an excellent point. I guess I didn't fully think that through. That was just a thought that I was.
So is there something about the Bible that you find value? I mean, your point here is, even if you don't believe it, the Bible can be valuable for teaching things. The question is, what is it that the Bible can teach better than some other method? What is it that we need the Bible for in order to be most effective at communicating an idea?
Well, within the context of studying various religious myths for what they speak to the human condition and the human belief system, the various things that make us human, our collective consciousness and so forth. Purely from that level, I would think that the Bible has something to teach us about what it is that makes us human, and what it is that why we believe these various things. And
so that doesn't even come close to answering the question. The question is, what is it that the Bible can teach better, or that requires the Bible in order to teach most effectively? First of all, I don't buy into this idea of a collective consciousness. But if we're going to learn about the human condition, why on earth would we rely on a book, an ancient book, from people who didn't have a good understanding, or as good of an understanding about the human condition as we have now? I mean, what's wrong with a good sociology course?
Well, I mean, the Bible is important, is an important sociological document, wouldn't you think?
It's good for studying the history of people who believe that stuff.
Right.
But what does it teach us that's of value?
Well, it's a good early document for showing the early thought process of like loving thy neighbor and these sorts of ideas that unfortunately are also blended in with some horrible stuff that's also in the Bible. But I would argue that there's some good early threads of like love thy neighbor, don't bear false witness, those types of things.
What difference does it make if it's early? Can't you just teach those lessons without the Bible?
I suppose you can.
Okay, so what do we need the Bible for?
Well, within that context, I guess you don't.
Cool.
It was I guess within that, you don't really need the Bible. I'll grant you that. That was a good point.
Well, I'm glad we agreed. We don't need the Bible.
Right.
So one thing to think about is, with the understanding that we don't actually need the Bible, I mean, your purpose for calling in was to talk about value in the Bible. And with the recognition that we can find value in almost anything, I can find good, moral lessons in a Harry Potter book, or I can find out interesting things about the human condition, good and bad, by reading Dostoevsky or whoever, Shakespeare. Might be worth thinking about, why were you even looking for a way to add value to a book which has so much objectionable content, when anything good could be achieved without that book?
Well, first, when you mentioned Shakespeare, you mentioned like the Harry Potter books and so forth. Many of these writers, especially writers within Shakespeare's time and so forth, they drew inspiration from biblical stuff and so forth.
Well, that's about drawing inspiration from the archetypes of stories that human beings have been telling forever.
I would say Harry Potter draws more from Tolkien and from actual European mythology than it does from the Bible. There's so much more pulled from that.
But the thing it's drawing from, even if you could say this drew from the Bible, it's the Bible has drawn from those things too, because these are about human interactions. There's a reason why we have the superhero, archetype and the mythological hero and the journey and the quest for discovery. There's nothing about the Bible that I find is significant in any of this. It's just another example.
Right, it is just another example. I think that its value only exists in the fact that it is a cultural perspective based on, there's a time span there, so there's multiple cultures represented, but it is a cultural representation of their view of what was valuable, of what was correct, the way that they viewed humans and their place in the cosmos. And so you have that point, right? Like you have, let's just imagine that we've got this graph and they are one point on this graph, and then every other culture is going to be a point on the graph as well. And at the end of the day, it's good to have the comprehensive bunch of points on that graph so that you can kind of compare and contrast, like what things do we have in common culturally as people, and where do we differ culturally as people, and why do we have those differences, and what causes those commonalities? What is it about us as human beings that makes it so common among cultures that we view this and very different aspects of how we view this? That makes it relevant because it is a record of what these people valued, albeit not an unaltered record. So for what we can look at, it speaks to, and like Matt is saying, one example. And it may just be one example, but with the many examples, then we can derive information about ourselves from that. But I do agree with Matt that as far as like a specific example, I don't know that it stands out beyond other examples.
I think it's far more valuable to have a comparative religions course than a course on the Bible.
Well, yeah, I actually agree with that. And Tracie, what you had brought up about I want to make sure I understand what you were saying, right? The cultural points in the Bible. Cultural points within the Bible, what the culture thought from a cultural perspective, and so forth. I agree with that. That's actually, I'm not the most vocally articulate person, so please forgive me, but that's kind of like where I was trying to go along with my argument.
That's why I didn't say anything up front, because I didn't want to put words in your mouth. I feel like what you were describing is not what I would have been arguing, as far as the value of the books.
Right, and like I said, I tried writing out various points in my argument and so forth. I'm far better at writing it out than articulating it vocally, so please forgive me. But
sure. But on that note, James, there's a bunch of other callers waiting, and since we seem to be in agreement that the Bible isn't, that valuable apart from learning what people believed and why, potentially, I think we're going to go on to another call.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I'll have a good one.
Sure, thank you.
Thanks. We have Rob in New Hampshire. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, Matt, how you doing? I really like your show. You have a lot of good things to say. My mother passed away January 25th. And I miss her very much. She lived to be 85 years old, and a former friend of mine posted on my Facebook that that I should have believed in God, my mom would still be alive. I thought that was very cool and uncalled for.
Yep.
And I just wanted your view on this, because I am an atheist, and I think it's a really bad argument to make that just because somebody's loved one dies, that God is punishing that person for it.
Yeah, your former friend is an asshole,
and
it's good that it's a former friend.
Logically, very flawed, because if what they're saying is correct, then nobody that believes should be losing relatives. Like, was your mother related to anybody that was a believer?
Well, see, my mom was raised a Catholic, and I've only been an atheist for like 5 years, and I've been watching this show since 2012. And my mom tried raising me Catholic, and I kind of like rebelled against it. Like I remember when I was in first grade, my mom wanted me to go to. My mom woke me up on a Sunday and said, "You've got school," and I said, "Wait, I don't have school today. It's a Sunday." She's like, "Well, you're going to school to learn about God. You're going to a special school." And I wrestled with this until I was like 40 years old. I'm 45, and I just think it's really offensive to say something like that. I mean, I even lent this guy money, and he never paid me back.
It is an offensive thing to say, but I guess, and maybe I'm not being as empathetic as I might be, but I'm so blown away at the ridiculousness of the comment that I'm having trouble getting to the empathy part of it. I mean, I agree with you 100%. It's offensive, but I also am kind of wondering, do they think that no one dies if their relatives believe in God? Like, do they think you'll live? Like, shouldn't there be somebody around that's lived to be 1,000 years old because they're always related to somebody that believed?
Not only is there nothing biblical.
It's wild.
The comment isn't biblically justified, but it's actually in conflict because if you read the Bible, basically you're allotted 70 years, and anything over that would be a bonus. So your mom got an extra 15 years, and I would just look at him and say those extra 15 years are because I didn't believe in your God who wanted to take her at 70. It's bizarre across the board, and hateful. It is, I have family members who are believers, and if somebody died, as has happened, I don't go there and say, "Oh, it's because you prayed." I don't go and say, "Oh, it's because you believed in God." I go there and I offer my comfort and my empathy, and can I do something to help? And sorry about your loss. And for non-believers, it's death and dying is a source of frustration because we live in a society where all of the pat answers are
everything happens
she's with
for a
God.
reason.
Everything happens for a reason.
God needed another angel. That's why your child died. It's like horrendous.
We don't get to rely on any of those things, and so we try to do better. And then when we find out that there's people like your former friend who could have relied on stuff like that, and they try to actually be spiteful. They're so upset that you don't believe what they believe that they're going to find anything they can,
even your mother's death.
Yeah. It's obnoxious. It is not something that a friend would do, and it's a good thing they're a former friend.
Standpoint,
I appreciate that. It's just, I find a lot of Christians to be hypocritical. They always preach that Christian love, but they say hateful shit like this.
Yeah, and it's not just, by the way, it's not just Christians. Everybody's prone to hypocrisy on occasion, but it's what you have to realize is that when somebody does something like that seems to be an attack on you, which also seems to be in conflict with what you think that they believe. Hey, God had a plan and blah, blah, blah. All they're really doing is expressing their own fear and doubt and concerns. Your non-belief is so threatening to this person that their immediate kind of knee-jerk reaction is to attack it rather than talk about the issues honestly. So.
Right. Okay, well, I appreciate you taking my call, Matt, and I appreciate your time you just gave me.
And Tracy.
Oh, I barely said anything.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm sorry. Thank you, Tracy.
Oh, that's cool.
Sure. Thanks, Rob.
I just,
right.
I mean, you can let him go, but when I see a comment like that, immediately I'm like, what if somebody has 3 kids and 2 of them believe and 1 of them doesn't and they die? Like, what if, there's so many questions I want to ask the person who made the comment, just from, like, how does this work in their head when they see people die all the time? Like, no one who has believing children has ever died. I don't know what they're thinking. It just doesn't make any sense to me that how would they come to the conclusion based on just what they see around them that someone's lack of belief is what caused their parent or parents to die?
Yeah, it's what
it doesn't make any sense. Like,
we would need them to. Should have had your former friend call in and explain why they're an asshole. But we got Brian in Houston, Texas. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, how are y'all doing?
Good,
Pretty
thank
good.
you.
Matt, I hope you feel better soon. I wanted to ask
Thanks.
you about your response to the fine-tuning argument. So, in your debate with Blake Genta...
Yeah, you emailed me
you
today or yesterday, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you give Blake 13 cards, and they all turn up to be spades, and you say, on the hypothesis that you had cheated, that would be more likely.
Mm-hmm.
And Blake agrees and says, he says, that's evidence that you're cheating, but not proof. And you agree, you say, we haven't determined anything about whether or not I actually cheated, but it's more likely on the hypothesis that I did cheat. So my question is, if you're going to argue that fine-tuning is analogous to the deck of cards, and then say, but with the deck of cards, if you have 13 spades and things line up like that, but that's evidence of cheating, if the two things are analogous, then doesn't that imply that with the fine-tuning, you also think that's evidence of cheating or agency intervention? You might not think it's conclusive proof, but wouldn't that be evidence?
Well, yes, but there's a couple things that are different. First of all, evidence for a proposition is separate from sufficient evidence to warrant a conclusion. So you can have one little piece of evidence that would be consistent with a hypothesis, but that is not enough to conclude reasonably that hypothesis is the most likely answer. In the case of the cards, we're looking at an outcome that we are attributing significance to. And in the case of the universe, we are doing the same thing. Right. This universe is significant because it's important to us. There's nothing about it that is intrinsically significant. And when we look around and we see what appears to be design, we are making a conclusion about what the likely explanation for the appearance of design. But the appearance of design is not necessarily design. And things can appear designed when they're not. And this is where it differs from the cards. Obviously, if I'm dealing out cards in front of somebody, we know that there's an agent involved who is capable. We don't know that for the universe. So like any other analogy, it's going to fall apart at some point. The purpose was to show that just because we find a significant result and we see the appearance of design that might make people suspicious about design, that does not mean that we have sufficient evidence to conclude that design is the most likely answer.
I have a question.
Okay, so I mean...
Can I just ask a question? Actually, it's a question for Matt, because I'm not familiar with the context of the example that you're giving, so I just have a quick question for Matt.
Sure.
So let's say that I have a deck of cards and Matt has a deck of cards. We each have a full deck. And I deal out 13 random cards out of my deck. And then Matt has to deal 13 cards out of his deck. Even though my 13 cards are random, wouldn't it be just as significant if he dealt 13 random cards that matched my cards? And they wouldn't be all spades, they'd just be random cards. But wouldn't it be amazing if he just started turning his cards and it turned out to be the same exact cards I had just turned?
Right, and in that example, I mean, I would agree that it's likely that Matt had prearranged the deck.
Right, but here's my thing. What if I didn't have a deck and I didn't put those cards down and Matt put down his cards and rolled out 13 random cards?
So I guess I'm confused. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying if I had put the cards down first and he had matched them, we would all be amazed. But if he had laid that same line of cards, but I had never laid any cards, we would just say that's just 13 random cards. Right? Even if it was the same lineup of cards that we had in the first example. So the idea is
improbable that he would have the same 13 cards that you had laid out.
Right, but he could lay those same 13 cards on another day when I'm not around and nobody's.
They would be just as improbable.
Just 13.
Is that what you're arguing?
Well, I'm saying that any 13 cards are going to be just as the odds would be the same, whether they're spades or not spades.
No, I understand. I think I understand. So my point isn't that the constants are just unlikely. What we're concerned about is what results from the constants. So, we can have 13 cards, but they just sit there and don't do anything. But when we adjust the constants, it's not like we have kind of the same big macroscopic picture where things just vary slightly. So we might have, different types of stars or planets or intelligent life. But things become pretty catastrophic. I mean, like if we adjust...
In some cases. I mean,
I would argue in most cases...
Okay, in most cases.
But it's still, what difference does it make?
Maybe this is the absolute only configuration of those constants that results in anything significant. That still doesn't tell you that it was fine-tuned. Let's say a billion different universes attempt to form over and over and over again. If this is the only one that could produce
what got produced,
then it's the only one that would ever recognize that it's the only one that could do this. And that doesn't tell, the fact of its improbability doesn't tell you how it came about. And unless you can demonstrate some agent capable of doing this, you don't get to just make one up.
Sure. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I would kind of get into the intrinsic probabilities of theism, but I think the issue there would be not that we're just inferring design arbitrarily, but saying, okay, is this plausibly due to necessity? And then, I mean, it doesn't seem like anyone in mainstream physics thinks that the constants are necessary. I think Paul Davies said that there's no reason to think that that's the case. But then, I mean, it seems highly also implausible that it's due to chance as well.
Is it the consensus of physicists that an intelligent designer is behind our universe?
No, and I'm not saying that because physicists don't believe in God, or I'm sorry, I'm not trying to argue from authority. I'm just trying to say if we can reasonably eliminate necessity and chance, and those are the only two naturalistic alternatives, then I guess I don't see how design...
How did you eliminate chance?
By its own right is that, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
How did you eliminate chance? It just seems unlikely?
Well, I mean,
isn't that what chance is?
Well, in your example, though, you said if you had 13 spades and they lined up, that it's more likely that there was cheating involved.
Yes,
right?
but the only reason we can say that for a deck of cards is because we know there is an agent here who is capable of cheating. So that now we have absolutely concrete confirmation that this is a possible explanation. You don't have that for the universe. You can't adjust any of the constants. You don't have any other universe to experiment with. It is all speculative. And to say that, it just seems unlikely. That to imply that the mere impression that it is incredibly unlikely is sufficient to conclude that there is an agent which we can't demonstrate that is necessary and sufficient or a more probable explanation. I mean, that's just bizarre to me. What
I don't know.
What keeps us from saying that it's not more plausible that universe-creating pixies are the explanation?
I just want to throw in, I don't know if my point is completely non-important or if it's not being understood. Because it could be that I'm not understanding something. But what I'm trying to say, no, not with you. I mean, I just think all around in the conversation, I'm wondering if I'm missing something or if everyone else is missing something here. But what I'm looking at, and the reason I gave the example I gave was to say, if you come into it with an expectation of what it's supposed to be, then you are more likely to think someone cheated. If you come into it acknowledging that there is no expectation of what it's supposed to be, then whatever you turn over is like random. You're just going to see it as that's what I turned over. And so when we get a universe where anything happens, like whatever happens, the only reason that it could possibly be significant is if there's an expectation that it was supposed to be this way. And there, as far as I know, is no evidence that this was like mapped. There's no blueprint that I'm aware of that shows what the universe was supposed to be before it formed.
That's something we skipped over. That was the point of the analogy that I used during the debate, was to show that it's only significant because we imbue it with significance ahead of time.
Right. If you think it's supposed to be this way or that it was supposed to be this way, then of course you're going to think that this is like what it was supposed to be. But there's no reason to think it was supposed to be what it currently is.
And even if we were to conclude that it couldn't possibly have been anything else, that this is this is a necessary universe, that doesn't tell us anything about how or why. And if we were to conclude that it's a chance universe, that doesn't tell us anything about how or why.
Maybe we're a mistake and it was supposed to be catastrophic.
Okay, so I guess my it sounds like you're kind of saying there's no reason to go ahead and like start at the table with assigning significance to our current universe, correct?
Yeah,
Correct.
because that injects a bias that affects the conclusions you're likely to
There's
get.
a big difference between shooting an arrow at a target on a tree and shooting an arrow and hitting a tree and then going and painting a target around it, right? That's an example that's been used before,
Yeah,
but do you understand
I
the difference
agree.
there? So if you just shoot a random arrow and then go paint a target, it's not amazing that you hit the target.
Sure. So I guess I just don't think it's that unreasonable to like be concerned or curious about what parameters are necessary for us to exist. I mean,
No, I think a lot of
That's
people
all
are
we-
looking into that, actually. I think that's like a fair thing for science to be examining.
so then I guess I don't understand the point about why it would be unreasonable for me to assign significance to the universe. I mean,
It's not. The idea is that you're assigning significance as though people were supposed to be a result of it, and that's the part where you're not showing your work.
It's significant to us.
Okay.
It is not significant intrinsically. It's like, I have a new truck. It's incredibly significant to me. It's meaningless to you.
Or here's an example.
doesn't have value to
I have
you.
a cat, right? Is the product of the universe potentially cats? Like, is it possible that cats were the purpose of the universe? That one
So,
day we would be a conduit to produce domestic felines, and that's what was, desired.
My wife is nodding and saying, yes, that is in fact the purpose of the universe.
I mean, the idea that human beings are somehow the point of the universe is a really...
Right.
I mean, what Matt is saying is it may be a perspective that makes sense if you're one of the human beings, but there's a lot of things this universe does, and if you're going to say that something about it was preordained, why not one of those other billion things that it does?
Yeah, and I think Stephen Hawking
Sure.
said if the universe is fine-tuned for anything, it's fine-tuned for the creation of black holes.
Yeah, like destruction
Right,
and vacuums.
right,
Yeah.
sure. So I think I hope I didn't give off the impression that that's kind of the dichotomy I'm painting, that either the universe exists solely for the purpose of human beings or it has no purpose at all. I mean, I think the universe could have a multitude of reasons, as you just mentioned, for
Or
existing. And humans are just one point of that. The point of the fine-tuning argument is the existence of things, not only humans, but like planets and stars and any kind of recognizable universe that we're familiar with is vastly improbable. So we should expect a universe that Luke Barnes has described it as something sterile, lifeless, and featureless.
Except that there would be nobody there to observe that and recognize it. Okay,
Sure, but that's-
if there are thinking beings existing, then we are necessarily in a universe that supports thinking beings. And so it should be completely unremarkable as thinking beings that we find ourselves in a universe that supports thinking beings. It's wholly unremarkable.
Yeah, even the catastrophic
But
universe would be as unique.
You
I mean, that
want-
would have its own unique parameters as well.
If we found ourselves in a universe that couldn't support human life, now that would
Yeah, that would be more
Yeah.
more remarkable, right? Yeah. Well, that kind of sounds like the anthropic principle. And again, Luke Barnes has said something along the lines of, when we examine stars and the reasons they burn, the answer to that is because of nuclear reactions happening inside the stars. The answer is not because otherwise we wouldn't see them.
right.
Right. And
So-
here's something interesting. When you have little children, they tend to assign agency to things that don't have agency. If you ask them questions like, why do birds sing? They will say, because it sounds pretty. Right? Like they think it applies to them, so that they interpret things as behaving toward them. And even something like a door shutting on their hand, they will say, like, it bit me, or
Although, yeah, birds would be agents. Doors aren't.
right. But it's still, what I'm saying is they interpret these things as being for their benefit, right? Like it's done for them or done to them.
Although we might be moving off to the side of Brian's point. So
Okay.
I want to see if we can put a bow on this.
Yeah, so I guess my point, it sounds like we're kind of in agreement. I mean, that, like, it's not, I'm not arguing that it's a necessary component of the fine-tuning argument that humans be the sole reason for the universe. I know I already mentioned that. And I'm not trying to, like, assign significance just because, as humans, we feel that our lives have value, so that's kind of what we need to do in order to, I guess, just get on with our lives. But I think all I'm trying to do is examine each possibility.
Well, this is the problem then, Brian. Let's imagine we have a mystery, and we want to list the possible solutions to that mystery. When it comes to I dealt out some cards, one of the possible solutions we know is possible is that I cheated. When it comes to the universe, what are the known possible explanations for the universe? There may in fact be none. But if we have no justification for saying that a God, an agent, is possible, then we don't get to include it in the list of possible explanations. And until we can demonstrate that our proposed solution is possible, it's not a solution at all.
So I guess, I can agree with that, but I guess I am under the impression that most people think theism is at least possible.
I think that most people probably haven't thought about this. But the fact that it's not demonstrably impossible does not mean that it's possible. This is something Blake and I went over and over again. Blake's position is that if you can't show it's impossible, then it is in fact possible. And my position is that possible and impossible are both assertions that need to be demonstrated, just like guilt and innocence. And you're not guilty just because we can't prove that you're innocent, and you're not innocent just because we can't prove that you're guilty, because what we can demonstrate is separate from what is. And so it may be the case that theism is impossible, but we can't demonstrate that. It may be the case that theism is possible, but we can't demonstrate that. But the null hypothesis puts us on the side of this is not the case until such time as it's demonstrated.
Okay, but I mean, people have tried offering plenty of philosophical arguments for why theism should be considered possible. I mean, I guess you're just saying that you don't find those persuasive, which is fine, and I'd be interested to hear your reasons for thinking that. But
because they all ultimately boil down to you can't prove that it's impossible.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of times they're just trying to draw an inference. For example, the cosmological argument, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I think the point of it is to infer something beyond the universe, had to bring it into existence. And we're not necessarily at a God yet, but once we can begin to give the attributes that this thing must have, for example, it must be timeless, immaterial.
None of that is part of the cosmological argument.
Well, I mean, that's how it's used. Like when William Lane Craig uses that argument.
I know William Lane Craig uses it in a dishonest fashion, because the Kalam cosmological argument begins with everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence. The universe began to exist. Therefore, the universe had a cause for its existence. There's nothing in there about God or timeless or anything. The whole thing is there must be an explanation for the reason the universe began to exist. That's it. Doesn't tell us any characteristic about that. That's all something that Craig and others add in after the fact, sometimes using other arguments, sometimes just asserting it and saying, I don't have time to go through it.
Well, so I mean, if both of those premises were correct, like the universe began to exist, and I mean that would imply that space, time, and matter are finite. I guess I don't understand why it would be intrinsically unreasonable to say, okay, well, if space, time, and matter came into existence at a finite point in the past, that whatever brought them into existence cannot also have those attributes.
So first of all, the first two premises are not necessarily sound. There are physicists who object to them, and this is something that Sean Carroll pointed out in his debate with William Lane Craig by having Alan Bluth hold up a piece of paper that says, we don't know whether or not the universe, and by that we're talking the cosmos, not just our local presentation. We don't know if it's eternal, but he suspects that it is eternal. So what we have is, at best, an unknown premise, which makes the conclusion unresolved. Now, the thing is, even if the two premises were true, the only thing you have is our local presentation of the universe, our local space-time thing, has a point in the past where it came to be. But if,
right, that's
if
where I think
time,
the argument's kind of...
yeah, if time is part of that, then it's absurd, nonsensical to talk about before that because there's no time. It's also nonsensical to talk about something that exists absent time because existence is temporal. And I don't know that we have any way to find that answer. And I find this is curious because I'm sure there are people out there, and you may or may not be one of them, who are convinced that some God exists and started it off, but they don't know much about him. They're not advocating for Christianity or Islam or whatever. But the whole point, the whole reason people are engaged in this exercise of let's see if we can find an argument that gets us to God is because they already believe in a specific God, which is how Craig goes from the Kalam to a classical theistic God to Jesus without actually connecting the dots very well. And if he didn't begin with this need to justify his belief in Jesus, would he cling on to the Kalam as if it were something that was going to demonstrate a God when it doesn't?
Well, I mean, I think you would have to ask him that, but I agree with you that
I'd like to.
That kind of chronology of argument is kind of, I think it's kind of poor. I mean, I don't think that like a teleological argument, I'm a Christian, but I don't think a teleological argument or a Kalam argument gets you to Jesus. I don't think it gets you to Christianity, but I think it's a good way. Like, I think if you were a homicide detective and you arrived at the scene, it would be important to establish that a murder had taken place before you tried to say, okay, this murder was committed by John.
Yeah.
So I think the argument.
I completely agree with that, by the way.
Creator exists.
I completely agree with that. And that's my problem is the people who are offering up theological explanations for the origin of the universe or whatever, pick your poison, have not even demonstrated that a murder took place. This is why, and Tracie and I remember a lunch we had ages ago where we came up with the courtroom analogy, and I've expanded and used it and everything else. I don't even think that the prosecutor has cause to bring the case before the court. You need probable cause. You need a good reason to think that you could begin to make a case. And I don't see that theism has done that.
Okay. Well, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot of possibilities because
how do you know
the universe is eternal? Well, I mean,
sure, the universe is eternal or it's not.
Sure. I mean, if it came into existence out of nothing, like in his book Why I Became an Atheist, John Loftus says he says that the naturalist maintains that the universe either came into existence out of nothing, is self-caused, which doesn't make sense because it would have to exist before it existed. It's always existed, or it just arises as kind of a natural brute fact. But to me, I think the naturalist position, it ultimately rests upon there being some kind of brute fact of existence, like something that just exists inexplicably. Because, I mean, I think you even agreed with Blake that we can't really have an infinite regression. We ultimately have to have some kind of foundation that doesn't have anything more foundational than itself, but it does in fact exist.
I don't know for sure if there could be an infinite regress, but here's the thing. What's wrong, and I don't want to confuse terms, so for universe, I tend to refer to our local space-time tracing back to Big Bang, and then
Big Bang, right.
Cosmos would be everything that has ever existed or will ever exist, and it could be that it's a multiverse popping up universes or whatever. Why is it not the case that existence is just necessary and that a cosmos has always existed?
Well, I mean, I think for the mere fact that we can imagine it having not existed, I think that seems to me to be sufficient enough for. I
can definitely conceive of what's currently here not having always existed. But I actually have expressed problems with the idea of non-existence existing. That the idea that there was a point without existence, I can't conceive of that because in my mind, that's an incoherent concept. Like to say that non-existence existed, I don't know how to conceptualize that.
Not only that, the mere fact that we can conceive of something not existing doesn't tell us whether or not that's possible. I mean,
I think that
it may be a trick of language, because I'm with Tracie.
It wouldn't, if it existed, then it wasn't non-existence.
It's not like there's a nothing that you could act upon. I can't even imagine a nothing.
Right. What would it be? You can't even ask what would it be, because it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know how to. I start really losing it when I start trying to conceptualize.
It's like talking about something existing outside of time.
Because it can't be.
But in either case, the mere fact that we can conceive of something doesn't tell us whether or not it's likely.
So are you arguing that like an actual nothingness, no space, no time, no quantum vacuum?
That almost seems like something.
Are you saying that
I mean, you just gave you just gave parameters, so that's something. I'm trying. I mean, nothing wouldn't even be descriptive.
Those were examples. I was giving examples of something, not what I would consider nothing. Because, like, you have
that would be something.
Lawrence Krauss and Victor Stenger, who say they say nothing is unstable, but what they're referring to is actually the quantum vacuum. But
yeah, Lawrence and I talked about
which is something, right?
Yeah, that's something.
Yeah.
It's not nothing.
Yeah.
Properties that can cause something.
Right.
What physicists have referred to as nothing is not the same as what philosophers have referred to as nothing. But the thing that philosophers have referred to as nothing, Tracie's saying, and I am pretty much in agreement, I can't conceive of that. I mean,
I don't know what, you can't even ask what, I can't, even if I say I don't know what it would be, that statement makes no sense, because if it were, if you could apply the to be verbs to it, it wouldn't be the non-existent thing or the nothing. So there's no way to even discuss it in a coherent way that I'm aware of.
Okay, I guess that kind of makes sense. So I guess my question then is, like, since we can't really, it's unreasonable to say that nothing existed and then something began existing, or I mean, if you don't like the temporal phrasing of began, I mean, you could say, well, I don't really know.
well, there was,
but
we can't say even based on our current models, there was never a time when something didn't exist.
So is that you're referring to, like, current inflationary models, or?
Well, even in our local time, in what we perceive as time here, if the model shows that time began with the Big Bang, then there was never a time when something didn't exist. But you can expand that out to the cosmos, and excluding our universe, just talking about the cosmos. That's still something that exists, and I find no reason to think, and in agreement with other physicists, that it's not in fact eternal. So you would need to show that that can't be eternal, and I don't know how you would do that, in order to talk about that as a beginning, which is yet another problem. But here's the thing, and I don't mean to, I promise I'm not trying to do anything weird or tricky or insulting, but we're going to move on to other callers here in a minute. But you're a Christian.
Correct.
I was for many years, as was Tracie, and all these interesting philosophical arguments for the existence of God. The God that I believed in was real, and he had a plan, and he loved us, and he created the universe, and he sent his son to die for our sins, and blah, 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 blah. How does that make sense if we can't reasonably demonstrate that he actually exists? Like, we want to know what's a plausible explanation for the universe. And theists, or Christians, whatever, theists would like to have God there as a plausible explanation, but they can't demonstrate that it's possible or that it's real, so they don't get to. Why doesn't God fix that? Why isn't, if God has put us in this position where you and I are reasonable people, and I don't find sufficient evidence, even though I used to, and I found flaws in those. Why is it that a Damascus Road experience is good enough for Paul or Saul, but everybody else has got to talk about mathematical possibilities messing with the constants of the universe, and even that doesn't get them to God or Jesus?
So I guess my argument for that would be, it's going to sound like a cop-out, but let me get through it completely, and hopefully it won't. I think in order to say that God should, appear physically to everyone like Paul's Damascus experience, I think you would need to show that given, let's say, Joe has an experience, he's an atheist, and he becomes saved. I think we would have to know what happened throughout the rest of Joe's life, all of the encounters he had from that point on. Maybe he met with some people and, prevented their salvation. So I don't know how Joe would do that, but I think we would have to have some kind of omniscience to know, okay, this, if this person were to become saved, it would ultimately be better for all of humanity, but I don't think we have any way of determining that.
I'll tell you why it's still a cop-out, because Blake has used this answer as well. The idea that we don't have sufficient understanding. Why can't God give us sufficient understanding?
I guess these are good questions. I guess it would be possible. I don't know. Our relationships may be hindered if we have too much insight into God's foreknowledge. I really don't know.
Can I ask a question?
That's a great question.
I just have a question, which is, you were leaning a lot, and this is not just like a criticism. I'm just going to kind of springboard off of this. But you were leaning a lot on the idea of, if you look at all of this stuff, it kind of looks like a murder, right? Like what you're kind of were arguing was that it does sort of look like a murder, and so maybe we should look at who did the murder, right? That's kind of what it boiled down to, is that you felt like the when you look at it, these constants and things make you think that there may be an intelligent designer there somewhere, right? Is that pretty much correct? I'm not misrepresenting
That's correct.
you. Okay, so when I look at the idea of what Matt is describing, and he's saying, if there's this God that really cares whether or not we understand that it exists and created the universe, why is he making it so incredibly difficult when he has reached out and made it very simple for some folks who, with Paul, I would say that if we're reading that story, God seems to have really cared whether or not Paul believed in him and did certain things, and God sent him this message like directly to kind of say, here's the deal, here's what I want from you. But for the rest of us that are having to look at all these things that you and Matt are talking about, as far as like, okay, so I have to go up and read some physics, and I have to go, and if it's that difficult to demonstrate that a God exists or that a God was involved in creating the universe, doesn't that seem to point to the idea that the God doesn't really care if we connect it to the universe or if we know that it's there?
Well,
maybe they care. Maybe it cares about Paul knowing, but it doesn't seem to care if I know, because it's making it real hard for me to come to understand. A lot of people aren't even going to understand what you and Matt are discussing, and so this is putting it outside of the range of most normal people that are just going about their daily business.
Sure, and I guess I wouldn't say that. Like, I think the fine-tuning argument is absolutely necessary. I think God has reasons for putting certain people in certain situations where they'll come to believe for different reasons. I think it's important for people to try and understand why they believe, but I think like the fine-tuning argument specifically only gets you to kind of like a deistic type creator. But I think that's a necessary step along the way if you're trying to establish that Christianity is true. But to your point about
is it actually a necessary
God
step?
made it easy.
Is it actually a necessary step? If Jesus were just to appear right in front of me, I would have skipped the step about deism, right?
Right, but
And why do you think that God has reasons for treating people differently?
Well, but even if God has reasons for treating people differently, then wouldn't it just make sense to say that if a person went through, and I know that just making sense doesn't make it, right real or anything, but what I'm saying is, if somebody goes throughout their life and they never believe that a God exists, it seems that God didn't really care if that person believed or not. That's not one of the people that he was focused on as far as this person needs to understand and believe in me. It seems like if God wants you to do that, and if you're saying that he drives you in certain situations in order to sort of help push you along in that direction, that all the people that don't get pushed in that direction, then it makes sense to assume that God is not worried about whether or not they believe.
Well, I think it's possible that God could have some good reason for allowing unbelievers to exist.
Why not?
Maybe
Yeah.
that person. Yeah, well, maybe that person doesn't personally have an interest in examining the evidence for God's existence, but maybe.
What about
maybe
people
they
like
play
Matt
some
that
role
examine, and they don't find it compelling?
Yeah, why doesn't Matt find it?
Well, I'm not even
answer?
saying why
I mean,
doesn't he find it compelling. What I'm saying is the fact that he doesn't find it compelling then, if I believe that God has this plan for each person that's individual, it seems that the plan for Matt is that he would look at the evidence, not find it compelling, and become an atheist.
So what was the question with
It's
that
not so much a question as, does it then seem, if God has this plan where he gives people the prompts that they need in order to find him in different ways, that the people who never find God, then he's not really worried about whether or not they find him?
Okay, so you're saying if people are examining and they don't find God, then God is doing something wrong. God should have.
No, I'm not saying God's
else.
doing something wrong. I'm saying that it seems that he doesn't, if he cares about a person believing and then he puts them in a certain direction.
He should be more concerned.
No, I don't. I'm saying that apparently.
Sorry, you're not saying he should be,
apparently,
but he just isn't.
right, yeah, apparently his plan for the atheists is that they just are going to not believe, and that's okay.
And I guess that would go back to my point. Maybe he has some good reason for allowing unbelief. Maybe so that Matt can have interesting debates, but I don't know.
My problem here is, and you've done this, and Blake has done this, and that's why I asked the question a minute ago. You think God's got a good reason, or maybe it's possible that God has a good reason. All of those are built on a foundation that you're convinced there's a God and that he knows and has plans and has a better understanding of things that we do. And you're fine with the idea that even though it doesn't make sense to you, you trust that it makes sense to God. And what I don't understand is, how can anybody be comfortable with that? The idea that, yeah, that's a really difficult question, and it doesn't seem to make sense with what we know and understanding about reality, but I'm just going to trust that God has a good explanation that he's not willing to share with us. How is that anything other than blind faith? And couldn't you use that same excuse to justify any position and any religion?
I think you could if you didn't have any kind of underlying foundation. So for Christians, I mean, the foundation for belief is the resurrection. That's what Christianity stands or falls on. So, but I mean, if we have good reasons for thinking that Jesus actually rose from the dead,
but you
then
don't.
All these questions about, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, I would argue that you don't. I mean, I've debated Mike Lacone on this as well.
That would be
But-
a long conversation.
But let's assume for a second that we had really good reason to believe that Jesus died, was buried, and came back to life. How did it happen?
Mm-hmm.
What's the explanation for how it happened?
Well, I think you would, if you're kind of hinting at maybe aliens did it, or maybe there's some other mechanism.
I'm not hinting at anything.
how-
I'm asking, how do we go about determining what the most probable explanation is? And how could we ever say that a miracle from a God that we haven't demonstrated this whole thing Tracie talked about, you found a murder. What theists are doing is claiming a murder when we have no evidence that a murder has ever occurred or that a murder is even possible.
Okay.
So if we've never had a murder,
no priors.
This is basically like one person on a planet alone is found dead, and somebody wants to conclude it's a murder just because a suicide seems unlikely. If we got an instance where there's no demonstration, I mean, technically, we wouldn't even know what murder was.
Right. So the idea of a higher power, we don't have examples of that. So you're saying it's not like a reasonable explanation, right?
Yeah, you don't get to just posit an explanation. You need to demonstrate that your explanation is in fact one of the possibilities. And you can't do that by just saying, oh, it's not impossible. And yet somehow you get to this, oh, well, if we had a good foundation, like the resurrection. But then my answer is, why on earth would, even if we agreed that Jesus rose from the dead, we don't have an explanation for how. You don't get to just say that, oh, it happened, and that's consistent with my God beliefs, and therefore that adds credence to my trust in God. And it's worse than that, because we don't have good reason to think that Jesus actually died and was resurrected.
So, I mean, I would take into consideration, I mean, I know you don't think there's good evidence for the resurrection, but if there was, I think we would also have to consider Jesus' own divinity claims. I mean, it wouldn't just be some guy being raised from the dead. It would be...
I guess my question there would be, there's a lot of things that we're assuming if we go these routes. Like, first of all, we're assuming that if an intelligent designer existed, this would be the kind of universe it would want to create. And I don't know that, especially if we're saying that that designer is so beyond us that we can't even conceive of it or can't even understand it or understand its motives or reasoning. Then how can we possibly say this is the universe it would make? And then when it comes to the idea of a resurrection, how do we know that a divinity, that resurrecting someone from the dead is something a divinity would even care about or want to do? Like, how can we make these predictions?
And I don't know that if in fact we lived in a universe where there was a God who came down in human form in some sense and had a bad weekend and then resurrected himself, I don't know how we could conclude that that is a reasonable, intelligent, or good God. When you add in the idea of this bloodlust and substitutionary atonement and the absurdity of coming down and being a sacrifice to serve as a loophole for rules he made up, I don't know how any of that gets us to this idea that, oh, well, of course that's a good God. A conversation that took place this weekend, and I think I'd probably have to wrap it up after this. Somebody approached me with this idea of people who were traumatized as children because they were told that you are so bad, God had to kill his own son for you. Now, for me, it was very different. I walked down the aisle at a revival at around the age of 5. I was active in a Southern Baptist church, and my perspective was this was not you were so bad somebody had to die for you. It was you were so loved that there was a willing sacrifice for you. So there's two ways of looking at this thing. But I'm finding that the idea that you were so bad that somebody had to be killed, at least for a weekend, is perhaps a more accurate. Because if it were all about you being loved, then you could be forgiven without the weird bloodlust. What is it about the blood magic that... I know the words. Oh, well, Jesus was pure and perfect, and then we required a perfect sacrifice, the one sacrificial lamb that was blemish-free to serve and absorb for all of our sins. I know the words. How does that possibly make sense if I'm God, that I have a creation that I know is imperfect, and I want to forgive them because they're never going to be worthy on their own. And so my best plan is to take human form and have myself tortured and killed for a weekend and raise myself up and then make the future of people's salvation contingent upon whether or not they accept this, when the only record is written down in ancient languages that change and morph, where the stories conflict such that a mere 2,000 years later, nobody could have a reasonably warranted belief that this actually occurred. At most, it would be a tenet of faith of I am going to trust that these authors are accurately representing what happened. But we don't have evidence for it. How is that a good plan? And how is that even a good thing that I need to kill myself temporarily? I mean, none of that makes sense to me.
So, Tim Keller has kind of an argument for why the crucifixion was necessary that I thought was kind of interesting. I mean, it might not touch on like the sacrifice of life itself, but I mean, he says, if I break someone's lamp, I can either just forgive them and then go without the light, or they can give me the money for the replacement, or I can pay for it myself. But either way, there has to be some kind of payment for that. So I think God's sacrificing of Jesus demonstrates that sin is like it's a real concern for him. It's not just something arbitrary that he can just kind of wave off. And I think if he were to just say, well, I don't really care what people do, I don't think that would be a very loving God, or he would have.
I care what people do. I don't ever feel a need to kill somebody based on what people do.
Right. So
I don't have kids, but I have family with kids. I don't ever feel the need to beat kids or threaten torture in a basement based on what they do. I think that it seems possible, and we can demonstrate that it happens, that you can encourage right behavior with reason. And even when it's difficult, there's nothing Tracie could do to me that would make me feel that I needed to kill someone to make up for it.
Or that I should die for it. I mean, what have I done in my life that I deserve
maybe
to
if
die?
she's coming at me with a knife in self-defense, I could, potentially do something. But generally speaking, to just say, oh, and we'll do this one thing one time, and that'll make up for everything. That not only everything that has happened, but everything that will ever happen. I don't know. It's a system that never made sense to me, even when I believed it.
Right. Well, I mean, these are all great theological questions.
Why doesn't God answer any of these great theological questions? Are we just supposed to trust that he's got good reasons for not answering these questions?
Well, I mean, if you're asking, why did God feel the need to kill Jesus? I mean, I think the Bible has explanations for that. You just might not find that satisfying.
No, wait. There is no need when it comes to God, right? I mean, God is he bound by?
No, I'm not saying he has to do it in order to, just because he's God, but maybe.
So he had other options, right? I mean, he even had other options with regard to the universe he would have produced. He produced the universe to do what it does, right? I mean, everything that people do, he built the universe kind of saying, this is the one I want. I want Ted Bundy to rape and murder a 12-year-old, and I want Tracie to have a birthday cake when she turns 13, and I want Matt to marry Beth, and I want someone else. I want that one woman that murdered her children, drown them in the bathtub. I want her to do this. And so everything that people do, he had foreknowledge, I assume, when he produced the universe, and he chose that universe and said, this is the one I want. And then he blamed everybody for doing what he pretty much set it up so that they would do. Is that what I understand?
So, I mean, I agree that God had foreknowledge. And thank you guys so much.
Was it perfect?
And he had a choice, right? He had foreknowledge of what this universe would produce, and he chose to create that universe. Okay. So then he's responsible for what he produced, right? He knew what would happen and said, this is what I want to do.
Well, I mean, I don't think that seems to me like it would be kind of arguing, parents are guilty for if they have a kid and the kid misbehaves.
No,
parents don't have perfect foreknowledge.
Let's say that I wanted to get pregnant, and I knew that if I had a child, it would go out and murder, it would become the next Hitler. And I said, I'm going to have this baby. And I know that this is going to happen. How am I not responsible for it? Don't I have a choice whether or not to have that child? Or let's say I could have a million different children, and I choose the one that's going to become the next Hitler. Aren't I responsible for that decision instead of choosing the one that would bring about world peace?
You can take the kid. You can take the kid out of it. If I get on my car in the freeway and I know, absolutely certain, even though I don't think we have absolute certainty about anything, but if I were in fact in possession of perfect foreknowledge, that when I got on the freeway, I was going to fly off of a ramp and smash into a building and kill 20 people, wouldn't I be responsible for that action? If I could not get in the car, but I chose to get in the car knowing what would happen, that makes me responsible.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are making good points. I guess I would say maybe God is responsible for for the existence of the creation, but not the sin within the creation.
Did he know
Maybe-
what
I
it
mean-
would be before he created it or not?
Yeah, but
And could he choose other? Could he have chosen other universes with other outcomes?
Could he have chosen a universe where you were here holding my positions and I was there holding your positions?
Sure.
Then he chose
Then
this
he chose
one.
this particular universe.
And we didn't have choices. He put it into production and put it into play, and he knew what we were all going to do. He knew what Tracie would do from start to finish before she did it, and he chose for that Tracie.
Yeah, if he didn't make a choice, if this was the only universe he could create, then knowing what would happen doesn't make him responsible. But the triple threat of knowing what would happen, choosing this
And
particular one,
having consequences.
and creating it, that's how you get to the responsibility. An action, knowing the outcome, that could have been different, means that he chose this universe. And he chose the one in which I'm destined for annihilation or hell, assuming, I don't change my mind. And he
Then blamed us, said we should die for it, and then
Yeah.
killed his own child / himself to atone for us.
it's really weird. And it's one of the reasons why, I'm writing a book on, called If I Were God, and it's one of the many
Right.
questions that are in there, because the world that we live in does not make sense under any theistic God or notion. And that's why when we get into these conversations, quite often it's, well, I don't know, but I trust that God knows, which we've heard multiple times, heard a couple times today. And I don't know, that's certainly not good enough for me. I am troubled by why that's a good enough answer for somebody else, because I remember as a kid, whenever my parents would say, because I said so,
Yeah.
that's never a satisfying answer, even if it turned out to be true. Even if my parents had really good knowledge and information and were doing what was in my best interest, it wasn't a satisfying answer. I obeyed because, generally, I'm not always, I wasn't perfect, because I had good reason to think that they knew best, and I definitely understood that I was going to get punished if I didn't. And yet I don't have any sort of confirmation like that about God. It's as if theists are telling me that my mom, who I've never met and don't know anything about, has been leaving notes for me with them, and they will give the notes to me, and it's all instructions for my mom, and it's all a bunch of stuff that I don't even have any way of assessing whether or not this is coming from my mom. It's weird. But on that note, we're running short of time. We've gone on for a long time. I appreciate the call, Brian.
Yeah, thank you.
And
Yes, sir. Thank you all so much.
sure, have a good
care.
day. Oh,
I think he was just saying you too.
yeah, I'm sure he was.
We'll
but
tell ourselves that.
I'm confident that he was. As a reminder, once the show's over, people involved in the show tend to go to dinner at, I think we're still going to Star of India restaurant, which is right there, 2900 West Anderson Lane.
I hope so, or I'll be
Somehow
there
or
by
another,
myself.
I can always get this move right here, but I couldn't find the thermometer that was here.
That's weird. The thermometer was there.
It's right. Ah!
Ooh, like magic.
So yeah, as a reminder, you can still donate. You can go to atheist-community.org and find information about the organization. And soon, the atheist-experience.com website, or somewhere in the near future, will be updated and rolled in. I want to make a note that this will be my last show for 4 or 5 weeks because of
Busy.
lots of travel, lots of events coming up. One of them we talked about before the show. I don't want to just pimp out and promote my schedule, but there's one thing that I'm really happy about, and that's in November. I'll be in Vancouver with Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris.
It's a coincidence.
The very next night, we're doing a bonus event with me and you and Sarah Hayter.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Whoa.
It's awesome. And there's a bunch more coming up. There's stuff. You can go to mattdillahunty.com and find the information. There's several events with Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Lawrence Krauss. Who knows what else is coming up on the horizon. Let's see if we can get a couple other calls here. Ram is calling from New Delhi, India, and has been waiting the entire show and then some. So welcome to the show, Ram.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, what is your position on faith?
On faith?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it depends on how you define it, but for my definition of faith, faith is the excuse people give when they believe something without a good reason. Because if you have a good reason, you would give the good reason. And so I don't see that faith is useful. I don't know that there's any position one couldn't justify by appealing to faith, and I have no use for it.
You have no use for it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you might have known about the placebo effect, right?
Yeah.
So you can explain the placebo effect to the people.
The placebo effect is when you get a positive result from something that there's no good reason to think should be producing a positive result. Essentially, you give somebody sugar pills and they start feeling better, even though you haven't given them anything to treat them, is one example.
Yeah, so that is exactly. So that is one reason, prayer can trigger a placebo effect.
I don't understand what you're saying.
I'm saying that prayer, when you pray to God.
He's saying, I guess, that faith can give people a placebo effect.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it can also cause, there's also something called a nocebo effect, right? Where you tell somebody that something horrible is going to happen if they take this pill, and people have bad reactions that are inexplicable.
And if people are sick, I'd rather give them the real medicine instead of the placebo.
Yeah. And also, you have to remember, placebos only work for things that are very subjective, right? And so I understand what you're saying. And yes, a person can, there is a small percentage of people who can make themselves feel somewhat better with very subjective things, right?
The fact that you can get a positive result from something doesn't mean that that something is positive. This actually came up in the debate that I did last weekend. I'll be posting it later this week. I know of people who would say that being diagnosed with terminal cancer was the best thing that ever happened to them because it fundamentally changed their view of what was important in life. It helped repair broken relationships, and their quality of life leading up to their death was far better than it had been for many years before that. There's no denying that had a good result. But even with that good result, we would not say that cancer is a good thing, and we certainly wouldn't say disease is a good thing. You can encourage people to do good things with randomness. I have a trick that I've done in some of my close-up shows where there are 6 cards that have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on there, and there's a die sitting out there. And you have them roll the die, and they can roll it as many times as they want, and it gets random numbers. And we're going to use those cards to determine how I'm going to treat people during the show. And so they roll, and let's say they get a 3, and we have them turn over the card that has a 3 on it, and it says be nice. And on every other card, it says kill. Now, if I were to say that this was my religion or that I'm putting faith in the die and these cards to tell me how to live my life, the fact that I got a good result doesn't mean this is a good system to determine. It's an issue of cherry picking, because if we'd rolled a different number, I would have had to kill the audience. So the fact that you can imbue a placebo effect, and the placebo effect can have good results, doesn't mean that the placebo effect is a good thing or that it's a good idea to strive to push a placebo effect.
So you're saying that praying can have negative effects also, like people killing each other?
Sure. Faith, I would argue, is more likely to have negative effects if it's the primary foundation for something.
If you don't understand the reasons why you're doing something.
But now majority people don't kill, right? Only a few factions kill, right? So my point is not really defeated in that sense.
I don't know what your point is.
Point is that the statistics out there, they outweigh that there are good people. There are more good people than there are bad people.
No, the statistics would show that, to quote Steven Weinberg, without religion, without faith, you would have good people doing good things and bad people doing bad things. But it takes something like faith or religion to get good people to do bad things. That doesn't mean that there aren't people, the majority of people, who find a way to remain good even if they're being encouraged to do something evil by their religion?
I'm not arguing for religion, right? I'm arguing for God, and I'm arguing for something that's natural justice, and that you can clearly see what's right and what's wrong. And a lot of people, people do bad things and people do good things, but people are not good or bad.
Wait a minute.
I would agree that you couldn't
wait.
summarize people that way. Go ahead.
I'm going to say that to say that people clearly see what is right and wrong is to deny huge arguments that people have about what is acceptable and unacceptable in a moral arena. So like here in the United States, we have people that cannot agree on whether a woman's right to reproductive choices outweighs, a fetal right to produce a offspring.
We have to consent to the abortion because
we have people here who think that they should be, that they need a gun to be safe, and other people who say that gun is dangerous to have. We have people here who say that people that commit murders should also be murdered and by state deaths. And we have other people who say, no, death penalty is wrong. So the idea that people have some clear perspective, I mean, I think there are some situations you can give where most people are going to agree on what is right and wrong. But I think to just say that this is a clear thing that people just tend to agree with, I think there are some huge moral issues where people cannot agree and where there are giant arguments about what is right and what is wrong.
And there's huge disagreement when you get into sexuality.
Yes. Yeah, agreed. So, but I was arguing for the fact that there's another good argument that why is there something rather than nothing?
Because there is.
So, because there is. That's it.
Do you have a better answer that you can demonstrate is true?
No, I can't demonstrate it.
Yeah, if you can't demonstrate it, I mean, until you can demonstrate it, I don't know of another answer. There are some questions. Science hasn't
disproven God as of yet, right?
Well,
I mean,
science hasn't.
Science hasn't.
So the fact that science hasn't disproven something doesn't tell you whether or not it's real. There are things that are fundamentally unfalsifiable, and nothing will ever be able to demonstrate that they're false. But that doesn't mean that they're true. Science hasn't disproven the 1,000 different gods that people have believed in.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, I understand that. But why is there something? I mean, we are all here.
I don't know.
Why? You don't know.
Could there be nothing?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I tend to have trouble trying to conceive of non-existence. We talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a limitation of my ability to conceive of things. It could be that there is some kind of coherent example of it that I am not able to conceive of, and it just because my imagination is not the limit of what can be. But I don't even understand how there's like a logical, coherent idea of.
But from your last call, you were saying that you had something to do. You were saying like I can not conceive of nothing.
Of non-existence. Yeah, I think we should be specific, right? Like when you and I assume that's what you mean when you say why is there something rather than nothing. Usually, what a person is saying is why does something exist as opposed to non-existence or nothing existing. Which the phrase "nothing existing" bothers me because I see that as like it's incoherent.
Yeah.
So for me the idea is, can non-existence, and I don't even know how to finish that sentence. What if you say can it be? You've already defeated yourself. If you say can it exist, you've defeated yourself. There's no way to finish the sentence. Just could non-existence what? I mean. I don't even know what it would. You can't even say it would do. What would it do? What would it be? What would it? None of those statements or questions even make sense.
So what happens when we die?
I don't know what would happen. I don't know what it would.
All of the best information, and I'm assuming you're talking about what happens to me when I die. All the evidence points to the conclusion that I cease to exist. Everything about me apparently dies.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. I'm going to take one that, based on the preview thing, I'm probably going to disagree with. Tom in Liverpool, thanks for waiting.
Hi, how you doing, Tracy?
Hello. Good.
I just wanted to say I love your show, and I use it for comedy. It's the funniest show on because it's like you're dealing with drunk people.
Yeah, except that I completely disagree. I think if you listen to the call with Brian earlier, I don't think that anybody would accuse Brian of being drunk. Or
no, but he goes in he's trying to justify getting another drink. I need another one. Come on, guys, give me another drink. Let me have one. I'm not too drunk. I can handle it. And they talk around in circles and tap dance around it.
I think there's
change the subject.
There's certainly some of that, but I mean, I don't. On occasion, certainly more than others, but I don't think that's a general thing. Which is why we get email and stuff from thousands of people whose minds have been changed because of what we've talked about on the show or debates we've done. So it's not a futile exercise.
Oh no!
Even if it may be frustrating.
I think it's great because it shows the whole fallacy of the whole premise. Because it's not like you browbeat these people. They come up with the thing and you point it out, and then they go through the stages. There's justification and anger sometimes. Some of the people get angry, and
sometimes I get angry.
A couple that I repeat play them because it's just hilarious.
I guess I have a bit of sympathy for the people that I talk to in that I held the same beliefs for a very long time, and also that I have had difficulty with concepts, for example, that I've gone through with Matt for days and days and days, where I have a great deal of difficulty understanding something that once I understand it seems so simple to me. I don't know why it was so difficult.
Yeah.
So I have these situations even outside of religion where I know that I can be have difficulty grasping a concept, and where some of the arguments or things that I might be saying probably sound kind of absurd from somebody that has a good understanding of it.
Yeah. The thing of it is that you admit that I don't know about this subject, and just somebody telling me what's the truth isn't going to solve it either. I need a whole bunch of information to be able to make a decision. Yeah. And a lot of these people just go with the first swing.
Sure.
On that note, Tom, we are technically over time, and there's one more theist caller I want to try to get to before we go to dinner.
Okay, no problem. Just, I'm happy to be on. Thank you.
Right, thanks
for the good work.
All right, so the last call we're going to do today, Randy in Marshalltown. Is that Iowa?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Marshalltown, Iowa. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
I have a quick question for you that has nothing to do with the show, so this is just me. I grew up in Missouri, and after Christmas, my wife and I always go exploring. Are there good places in Iowa that we should go visit and see stuff?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Definitely go check out the Iowa State Fair. It's a lot of fun. You get a lot of great food there. You can get just about anything imaginable deep fried and on a stick. I had chocolate-covered bacon. It was pretty sweet.
I don't know if that's going to be going on in between Christmas and New Year, but anyway. So what did you call about? We'll plan our vacation travels another time.
Well, just between Christmas and New Year's, the downtown area in Des Moines is very nice as well, so I definitely recommend checking that out. In terms of what I was calling about, I just had a few atheist friends who wanted me to call you guys because they said you were the Goliath of the atheist movement, and I'm just a mere David here, but I thought I'd just talk about something I found to be a little concerning, and that's that Peter Beinart in The Atlantic and a few others, such as J.D. Vance, sociologists, some other religious scholars, they've noticed over the past few decades that church attendance in the United States has declined rapidly, and with that we've seen large-scale rises in drug abuse, alcohol abuse, anxiety and depression, a decline in moral values as well. We've seen kind of the two-parent households decline, and anytime you watch anything on TV, it gets excessively sexual. It's a problem. I'm trying to raise a family here, and it's scary. So given these statistics, would you say that when people stop practicing religion, it can lead to some severe societal consequences?
Absolutely not. So first thing, I'd recommend Steven Pinker's book, Better Angels of Our Nature, which gives truth to the lie that society is actually in decline, or that it has anything to do with a religious thing. But you're talking about, some of the things that you're objecting to. You're objecting because you have a foundation that says they're wrong. I don't have that foundation. I don't have a problem with sex on TV.
Or single parents.
I don't have a problem with single parents. Is it ideal? No, but in some situations it may be preferable.
Well, the other thing, though, is couldn't we set up a society where we have more support for parents in general, and where being a single parent wasn't so difficult? I mean, that's a social problem more than a moral problem.
But in addition to Steven Pinker's book, I'll recommend Gregory S. Paul's work that was published in the Journal of Religious Studies. We've been talking about it for years. That shows it is religiosity versus societal health. And on virtually every factor that he was able to analyze, societal health increases as religiosity decreases.
I'll have to take a look at that study for sure. The thing I would note, though, is a comment that was made earlier. I do think that the church can definitely provide a lot of benefits for people who are struggling with drug abuse, alcohol abuse, and mental illness in general. I've had a lot of people come to our church here who've had these problems, and we've been able to work with them, support them, and we do a lot of missionary work around the country, helping and empowering people. And I think that the church can serve certainly as a very beneficial way to empower people.
I don't disagree. The question is, can they get that help elsewhere without the trappings of religion attached to it? Certainly, Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've talked about it for years. I have huge problems with it. I'm not saying that church communities aren't beneficial to people on occasion. Any tightly knit community is going to be beneficial to its members. The issue is, how beneficial is it to society, and are there better ways? So if somebody is suffering from addiction and you bring them in and you help them out, but they get the idea that, faith in Christ is their path out of this addiction, when we have no good reason to think that is actually a viable path out of addiction, that we need to treat substance abuse with proper science and not just with faith. Nobody's saying churches can't do good things. This gets back to the call we had earlier about, you can encourage people to do good things with randomness, with lies, but we're looking for what path is actually better. I know lots of churches that are involved in all sorts of
like food
banks and clothe and feed the homeless. But I also know the Atheists Helping the Homeless groups doing it too, and they don't have to hear a sermon in order to get the toothpaste and other supplies that we provide out there, as is the case with Humanists at Work. If you want to feed people. You don't need to feed them and give them a sermon beforehand.
Sure. I understand the point that's being made there. Just from a statistical standpoint, I looked at a few meta-analyses specifically from City Journal and a few other publications, and what they've noticed is that when it comes to philanthropy within the United States and across the world, that just from a success standpoint, the ability to mobilize people and become successful, the overwhelming majority of people who have been successful in doing this have had religious purposes.
Yeah, do you know why?
What's your explanation?
Because religious organizations have had a privileged preferential status where they don't have to pay taxes, they automatically get that status, they don't have to open their books to anyone, and they have an organizational structure that encourages people to participate and encourages them to do things, otherwise there are potential consequences. As soon as secular organizations like Foundation Beyond Belief started getting involved, and as soon as we got to the point where atheists weren't necessarily being maligned everywhere across the board, you're seeing more and more secular charities, and they're doing more and more good work, and they're doing it openly where their books are open for review. To say that more charitable organizations have been more successful with religion it would be surprising if that weren't the case, considering that we've had religions in this privileged status where they control what people do and encourage what people do, and build these communities. It would be shocking to find out that they weren't actually doing good. Once again, the issue is not, are they doing good, but are there better ways to do that good? Are there more efficient ways? And they have built an infrastructure where they have huge advantages, and it's difficult for anybody else to break through that to get into the marketplace, because the culture is already conditioned of, I want to give to organizations, I'll give to these churches that are feeding orphans and helping the homeless, etc. It fundamentally takes a change in society's perspective in order for secular charities to get a leg up on thousands of years of this privileged status that religions have had.
I understand where you're coming from, and I guess I feel like you probably have callers to get to. You seem to be running over time, but I do have one last question on this matter, and that you mentioned kind of the structural aspects, how religions are tax exempt, how there's certain problems in that respect. If they're doing productive work and they're empowering people within a community, why should we punish them or give them any kind of disadvantage?
I would like to answer this because the church I went to did nothing as far as community service. They felt that they were very insular and that their job was not as a church to reach out to the community. They felt that that was actually non-biblical and that the church's job was to take care of the church's own, because in a biblical example, that's how it's done. And when you start looking at charity outside of the church, that can be done on an individual level, but not as the church. And yet that church is still a church and still gets that tax-exempt status for their contribution to the community, even though they're just dealing with a group of maybe 70 people that they're actually leaning together with. Now, should that church be considered a charity?
In terms of the laws, as long as you apply under the religious aspect, then you are getting tax exempt. But I'm sure your church did some good work for the people around the community. And
no, they did not. They believed that was in opposition to what God wanted them to do. The church did not do those things. It was a conservative Church of Christ, and they do not believe in that. They believe that they are charitable within the church, and that if you want to do it outside, you are tasked with things like the Good Samaritan from a personal perspective, but that the church as an organization should not be going forward and doing these initiatives. Now, what I'm pointing out, what you were describing was, should they be treated with a disadvantage? I think what Matt is saying is they should be treated equally, not given a disadvantage. They should be, just like any other organization, asked to demonstrate the good that they actually do in order to have that tax-exempt status that everyone else has to demonstrate.
Yeah, you were eager to assume, oh, I'm sure your church does this. Well, here's the thing. If churches are actually doing something that is in the public interest that society would deem deserving of a tax-exempt status, then there should be no problem with them opening their books to review and demonstrating exactly what they're doing, and like operating like any other charitable service to show how much of my dollar goes to the thing that we're actually doing. Because if I donate $1 to any other non-religious charity, their books are open and we know how effective they are. Churches are not being punished by taking away their tax status, which I think we should, tax-free status. What they're doing is they're being put on the same level playing field as everybody else. We are taking away the privileged position that they've had, that they have not demonstrated that they've earned, and now we're actually we're operating in a transparent fashion. And under that model, any church that actually is operating in the public interest will still, under my model, get that tax status. But to do it by default, because people assume that churches are doing good things. You know, we don't know exactly how wealthy the Catholic Church is, how wealthy the Mormon Church is, but we do know a lot of the things they own. And I would say there's not only good reason to be suspicious of how much money is being sent to charities, but whether or not those charities are operating in a good way. Mother Teresa, for example, was a horrible monster who encouraged suffering, and yet is lauded by nearly everybody. She felt that those people were deserving of that suffering. I'm not comfortable with having religious organizations policing themselves and saying, oh yeah, we're doing good, we should get this tax status, and everybody just saying, yes, that's the case. Because we know a good chunk of that money is going to hide child raping ministers and moving them around from place to place. And that's just one of many problems. So open the books, operate on a level playing field, and all those problems go away.
I definitely agree there ought to be accountability within the system. I think that's a very fair point. But what I would ask, though, is on a statistical basis, what percentage of these churches are engaging in corrupt, fraudulent behavior, and what percentage?
You don't know. That's the problem. You don't know because they don't have to open their books. They don't have to tell you anything.
I understand, but just from my experience, like from what I gauge, the vast majority of churches and vast majority of people I work with have not had any kind of fraudulent practices.
Okay, stop, Randy, stop. Out of all of the churches in the world, What percentage do you think you've actually worked with?
Not over 50%, that's for sure. But a significant number.
Do you think you've worked with more than 1% of churches in the world?
Maybe not.
Yeah. So your sample size really doesn't warrant you reaching any kind of conclusion about how honest churches are. Not only that, but you could have worked with maybe even 5 or 10% of churches. And if you're working with a bunch of different churches, what makes you think that you're going to be in a position to figure out whether or not there's corruption there?
In terms of myself, I can only speak for the certain groups that I've worked with particularly, but I also have noticed in certain academic studies and other studies as well, just again from a philanthropic standpoint, that they have there doesn't seem to be as widespread a fraudulent problem as
how do you know? Have you examined their books?
I don't know if I have examined every church's books, obviously, and that would be certainly a lot more.
How many churches' books have you examined? How many churches have allowed you to audit their finances?
A few of them, but not more than 1%.
I'd be surprised if it was more than 0.1%, because there's a lot of churches. But in any case, your self-sampled statistical thing doesn't tell us anything. And even if you were able to analyze the books, I don't necessarily know that that they're going to give you the right books, that you're going to have the relevant expertise and time. But all of that is moot, because let's assume that they're all doing wonderful.
Open the books.
Open the damn books and participate on an equal level with everybody else. There's no justification for having a preferential system that allows for that corruption in the first place. There's enough corruption in corporations that already have to open up their books. There's no reason for anybody to remain hidden. But on that note, we're over time and it's time for dinner. I appreciate the calls and everybody here. Thanks, Randy, for calling in.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
And for the folks on the other side, I'll be gone for the next 4 weeks, but Tracie Harris and Russell and other people will be here taking all kinds of calls, and I'm sure they'll have loads of fun. And I'll see you next month, and she might see you next week. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I have to check the schedule.
Bye-bye.
This is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.